Hi, my name is Ben,
Hi, my name's Laura.
and today we're going to share with you how we travel around the world with slow travel. Welcome everybody to a guide to Wanderlust. Today let's talk about slow travel. So what is slow travel?
So, slow travel is when you decide to travel long term, but you don't want to hop from destination to destination really quickly, and you decide to take your time in each location. So, usually it's around up to around 3 months in each location as opposed to moving every couple of weeks.
So then, for families out there who want to know, who would for this would actually be a right fit for them, who would it actually be best for? Do you think?
I think slow travel is probably best for families that have kids. I think traveling when you move really constantly can be really tiring, and if it's tiring for us adults, imagine what it's like for kids. I think that slow travel probably suits a lot of people who want to have the experience of full-time travel, but maybe are on a budget, because we know the expenses of constantly traveling can also add up. So really I think people with children, people who really want to immerse themselves in the culture, get to know the countries really well when they're there, as opposed to just breezing through. And people who need to travel sort of on a budget and not sort of blow all their money in the first 6 months, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So, do you think that slow travel is the best way to travel?
I mean, I don't think there's a best way to travel. I think everyone's different, and you find what works for you. And I think everyone has a different threshold around travel and how often they move. So for us, I think it took us a little while to find out what was a good length of stay for us.
Yeah.
And we kind of settled on, around a couple of months, allow ourselves time to unpack and to really enjoy ourselves.
It did take us sometimes actually get settled after we moved, wasn't it? Because the reality of actually leaving your country, we lived in the same country for 30, 35 years, I mean, it was really exhausting packing up everything and selling everything we had, wasn't it? And then by the time we got there, even after 2-3 months, we haven't really adjusted probably, had we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it took us a bit of period of time to learn what was going to suit us and our family. So I think in terms of how fast you travel, it's going to be dependent on you and your family, if you travel with family, and what works for you.
Yeah. So let's get more into detail about some of the benefits. We've actually got a blog post up right now. It's called The 12 Benefits of Slow Travel and What is Slow Travel. So let's get into a bit more detail about that. Let's actually try and nail and speak about some of the benefits so that you can kind of get a better idea of why you should actually consider this way of traveling. So I'll start with the first one, time to explore. So what Laura was speaking about before is when you actually get to a place, typically when you're, let's say, on holiday or in a tourist mode, you really want to do the country and you want to see all the sites. So when you're kind of slow traveling, you take your time, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you especially if you're working as well. If you're a digital nomad, the way that we are, you don't have the energy to get out and sightsee every single day, and that takes a lot of energy, takes money, and you need to sort of pace yourself. You don't want to burn yourself out. So I think having the time to settle in a place. Do a little bit of sightseeing, but also get the work that you need to get done, have time to relax, adjust to a new environment, and adjust to everything that's different around you.
Yeah, and I think there was a time when we were in Thailand and we probably went away every 2 weeks or something like that, because that's the part of travel, and you do have the flexibility to do that, and you can do your work around that. But essentially, you're not doing something every day, and the idea is that you will eventually come back to the country that you've essentially been to. When you're on holiday, you're thinking about you've got to do everything in 2 weeks to a month, and you might never come back. So this way is a bit more I wouldn't even know to say. Yeah, it's just I prefer it. Yeah.
I think that we kind of keep our minds open in terms of the places that we go that we really love, and we know, all right, we're definitely going to come back here one day. It might be time to move on now, but we know that there's more exploring we want to do.
Yeah. The second one was you immerse yourself more in the culture, and this is something that you would experience on I wouldn't say a superficial level, because you would experience the culture when you are traveling, wouldn't you? But I think when you actually live there, you have to go to say when we were in Thailand or Sri Lanka, you don't just go to the big chains. You would go to the local supermarkets, especially if you're traveling slowly. The time spent there, you've got to be smarter with your budget and things like that. So you would go to some of the more
the markets, as opposed to like the touristy supermarkets that are really expensive. You go to the local markets, you try and engage with the local people. You try to use the little bits of language you've picked up. Yeah, absolutely. And you're not staying in, a hotel or a resort where there's lots of other tourists and it's just that community is built around tourism. You're sort of getting more into like the local areas.
Yeah, and the food, like, if it's local food, it's obviously a lot cheaper than kind of westernized food or like, food from overseas, isn't it? So then that's where you would save money too. So you're kind of experiencing it on that kind of like
completely different level to what you do when you go on holiday. And I mean, we've been on lots of overseas holidays before we started full-time travel, and our experiences were always, I think, completely different. We'd get a villa and we'd have maybe people to cook us food, and we'd do all that, and it was kind of that surface travel where you're still a tourist, whereas opposed to traveling full-time and actually properly settling into a culture and getting to know the people around you.
So next on the list was like making connections. Obviously, when you travel in a short time frame, if you're on a tour, you might make some connections with other travelers. But when you travel, obviously for an extended period of time, you can actually set down routes a little bit, I suppose, if it's between 3 to 6 months, and make some real connections, I suppose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think some of the places we've stayed in longer, I've been able to actually make some friends and get to know some people, form a little bit of a community, and people that I think I'll stay in contact with for a long time to come.
And we have like people we've met in Sri Lanka, and Laura's got a best friend in UK now, and we've got like a whole like church group in Thailand, and like a whole network there that we created probably in the space of the last 2 months before we moved. So it was actually like just awesome. So I mean, learn the language. I mean, I would say that you can't really stay in a country for that long without seriously thinking about learning the language. For us, we began Thai lessons, and it helped us greatly. I mean, not so much just for like learning it because we were there, but it really helped us to be more confident in public, I suppose, didn't it? And with the locals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think once you feel like you can at least engage, on a basic level, or they see that you're making an effort, even if you can't really sort of clearly express yourself in that language yet, if they see you making an effort with the language, then it goes a really long way in terms of building that engagement rapport with people.
The next one is embracing the journey. When you go to travel as a tourist, you're really kind of just trying to get in and get out. You're trying to see all of the stuff you can, because you know that like maybe your holidays aren't coming for another 6 months or a year, aren't you? But when you're here, like you really got to think about, like you're really starting to kind of just relax and unwind, seeing where the day takes you and what happens, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you always say go with the flow, don't you?
Yeah. Keep a little spontaneity and flexibility in your plans, So, I mean, I've seen some families that have their travel plans day to day, planned out over 6 months to a year, and hats off to them. We certainly are not like that. We like to keep it light and loose and see where the wind blows, and that works for us.
We just got here to Blotzheim in France, and there's Switzerland and Germany probably about half an hour away from us, all in like intersecting like borders. And we had these like grand plans of going out and doing things, and then it's been 2 weeks already, and we've been to the borders like once, and we barely even like leave the house. But like travels just can be so exhausting, and this is just so much like amazing space at the place we're staying. We've got a pool, and some like a lot of places to go walk, and there's just like local shops. We've got a car. It makes a really big difference to, I mean, essentially like enjoying what you have when you have it, and it's not always about just going out and doing things, is it? It's just like if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We'll be back.
I think like don't put pressure and expectations on ourselves. Like we found out that can very quickly lead to disappointment. So keep your mind open and go with the flow. Yeah,
that's it. So the next point is saving money. Saving money is like one of the best things about like long-term travel, isn't it? Or I mean, slow travel. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of our major expenses while we full-time travel is when we have to move from one city to the other, and that can often cost a fair bit of money and take out of our budget.
You can go. I've got something to say, but like, you can go if you want. So, I mean, essentially, like, because when we narrowed it down, we really thought about it, and like the biggest expenses is transitions. So like if we know that a big transition's coming up. We've just started to budget for it. So we know that we'll be moving to Germany straight after this, and that's probably in the next week. But then after that, we've got a month, and we know that the transition's going to include like cost of car and flights, and that you'll be spending $2,000, just like as a benchmark. And then if you come under that, then that's great. But the thing is, like those expenses, they're in replacement of, let's say, something like mortgage payments or house payments or car payments, insurance, things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have a lot to say on budget travel, and we'll do a separate post on that as well. But I think that there's definitely benefits to slow traveling when you're on a budget, and also, some of your transitions are not going to cost much. Like I think our transition from France to Germany is costing us €35.
Yeah.
But our transition from London to France, which was only a 1 hour flight, was over $2,000.
Yeah.
So, sometimes things are not going to sort of add up or make sense, and you just have to go with it. But you always have to factor those costs in.
Yeah.
So the less transitions you make, the cheaper it's going to be usually.
Yeah. So the next one is like a really, really important one. And if you want to sustain this long term, it's actually longevity. So because you're actually giving yourself time between like places that you're staying for longer durations, you're actually getting time to relax. And because you're not an agenda, haven't got a schedule, you're essentially living at those places. And like, if you're not getting homesick, you can actually sustain this for a lot longer than, say, like if you were traveling and you were moving every 3 weeks to 3 to 4 weeks, it would just get really exhausting, I suppose, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people think that they want this lifestyle, and then they might start and they'll find themselves burning out quite quickly and getting really tired and worn out and missing home, missing stability. I think that's a really key one, is people who really crave that stability and a base, really. And I think if you can sort of get that sense of stability in snapshots while you travel, then that's going to lead to you being able to do it for a longer period of time than, finding out really quickly it's not for you.
Yeah, definitely. The next on the list is removes urgency from all your travel. So when you're actually traveling, it can be really, really intense, can't it? Like changing locations, getting to airports on time, catching the right flight, booking accommodation. It can be really, really stressful. When you slow travel, you get a really good break from that kind of that stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it gives you time to decompress and relax.
So the next one is teaches you to value your time. This is something that I find really, really interesting, because obviously when you're back at home, we come from Melbourne and the house prices are like quite expensive, and you really do need to work like consistently, and taking time off work can be like detrimental to obviously, like your finances. When you're slow traveling, like afford to take the time in places, especially if you're like house sitting or you're staying in cheaper locations, it can be like quite beneficial to just sit down and just relax and enjoy your time with your family, and that's why we love like it for family travel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because we chose to sell everything before we left, we don't have, the expensive rent, the car payments, the mortgage payments and all that came along with living at home anyway. And so even life at home was very expensive. So yes, while we spend money traveling, we don't have those expenses sort of underlying our day-to-day life. So actually I don't need to work as many hours as I did at home. And I can spend more time with my son and more family time.
Yeah, like the next one is really quite important. I actually love this fact about it. It teaches you to adapt. Essentially when you're traveling, you will notice that when you're traveling as a tourist, that you're basically going to be like changing things on the run, aren't you? And sometimes there might be a missed flight, and it'll affect you in a way that'll be quite frustrating as a tourist. But at the end of the day, you're going to get home, aren't you? But as a like slow traveler, you're going to find that it makes a big difference, in a lot of ways. Like, for example, if you're about to overstay your visa or something like that, you're going to have to endure that kind of stress and then kind of find a solution within that kind of time frame, I suppose, aren't you?
Yeah, I think having a traveling lifestyle has taught us a lot of lessons about patience and adaptability and flexibility and just not sort of letting small things stress us out.
Yeah, you will still get stressed, but you just have to kind of roll with it, don't you? Like, I mean, the thing is, like, we just moved here to Blotzheim, and the house that we were staying at, the owners actually were kind enough to lend us their car, but they drove manual, and that's the only car that they had available. And I've never learned how to drive manual. So in London, before we moved here, I took some lessons. And when we were in Thailand, we had to ride scooters for a short amount of time, and Sri Lanka as well, because it was just so much cheaper. It was just way too expensive to get a car. So
yeah. So learning new skills is definitely something you got to be open to. Yeah.
So what I'm really, really passionate about is like it promotes lifelong learning. For me personally, I became a digital nomad probably about 5 months into our travel. It was quite stressful up until that time, and understanding where to start and how to get things going was quite difficult. But that was like the learning process. And the thing is, like, if you're at home and you're doing the job that you've always been doing, you know, you learn little bits and pieces, but you're not learning like overall massive skills. Whereas this is like, well, what do I need to do to survive day to day? How do I keep traveling? So then you kind of keep expanding and adapting. That's that learning, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think we can get in a rut when we do the same thing day after day. So even though I'm doing the same job at the moment that I was doing back home, it online anyway, so I was able to then just smoothly transition into that. But it wasn't really teaching me much. It wasn't challenging me or pushing me at that point. And you know, at least now, yes, I'm doing the same job, but I get that learning in other ways, in other areas.
Yeah.
Like I'm constantly learning and growing, which I think, you know, as humans, we really need.
Yeah, and I find that, you know, with that lifelong learning, you're trying, once you start like getting used to learning, you kind of start picking up the things that you've always wanted to do. I've always been a little bit of a blogger, and I've always created some videos. And I, you know, always wanted to learn how to drive a manual car or ride a scooter. And those are all the things that I've had time to do. Because, not necessarily because I had the time, but because I kind of had to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'm taking the time now to look at other interests and, you know, things
The
that...
first time in, 15 years,
I mean,
right?
I've been a social worker for 10 years and I never really thought about expanding that and doing something different. And now I have the time to actually look at, all right, well, what is it that I really want to do? What is it that really interests me? So, and I wouldn't be able to do that at home because I would be, you know, working full time and not have that time. So that's what slow travel is, and that's some of the benefits and some of the things that we think are really quite helpful about living this kind of lifestyle. We'll actually talk about the essential tips that we have to how to slow travel in another video, and I'll link it in description below, or like put up a link above. So thanks for watching our video today. We are Laura and Ben from A Guide to Wanderlust. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website, aguidetowanderlust.com. And also hit the subscribe button, and we will keep you updated with tips and tricks for how to travel full time. But thanks for watching us today.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.